Dear Patriots, please subscribe to our patriotic channel. Like and share this video so your friends can see it. Thank you. Huge Trump signs just went up everywhere and cover buses, sending major message about what's coming. President Trump has done what every prior president in my lifetime has promised, but none had the strength, or guts, to follow through. I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, said President Trump a few months ago. He then added, while previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering. And in doing so, President Trump and the world will finally see the promise become a reality by having the United States Embassy moved from its current location in Tel Aviv, to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. Previous administrations have promised this during campaigns, but once in office, they have completely avoided the move because they did not want to inflame the tensions between the Palestinians and Israelis, because most erroneously believe that appeasing Muslim terrorists is the way to peace. Trending: CNN reporter nearly gets into physical fight in White House, gets smacked back to reality by Sarah. Although no other nation has their embassy in Jerusalem, someone has to be the first to make the move, and that's someone in the United States under the leadership of President Donald Trump. And because tomorrow this move becomes a reality, some very interesting displays have come up in Jerusalem. As you can see above, in response to Trump's announcement, "God bless Donald Trump" signs are popping up all over the city of Jerusalem. A recent poll found that 77% of Israelis believe that President Trump is more pro-Israel than pro-Palestinian. This is a huge contrast to the prior administration, where only 4% thought President Obama was more pro-Israel. When President Trump made the decision, the anti-Semitic United Nations was quick to condemn the decision, even though UN Ambassador Nikki Haley warned the US would think long and hard before funding the UN if the vote went this way. Haley certainly reminded the rest of the world that the US is a sovereign nation and we do not answer to anyone. Trump himself later weighed in by saying, "We're watching those votes, let them vote against us, we'll save a lot. We don't care." More on this via WND. Ben Shapiro listed 7 reasons Trump's decision to move our embassy to Jerusalem is right, calling it an act of not only political bravery but moral courage. But is it an act that God Himself will bless? Is there spiritual significance to this decision as well? Earlier this year, a pastor asked me if there was any way to get a message to the president. With great passion, he said to me, during the campaign, Donald Trump promised to move the embassy his first day in office, but he didn't do it. And when did the protest marches against him begin? His second day in office. He will never see the full blessing of God until he makes good on his promise. Others believe that Trump's decision will prove disastrous. As a headline on the Daily Mail proclaims, he's declaring war on 1.5 billion Muslims. Trump will recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital today despite international fury from the Pope, Britain, Russia, China, and Palestinians. In the words of the Palestinian Authority's Manuel Hassan, he is declaring war in the Middle East. He is declaring war against 1.5 billion Muslims, and hundreds of millions of Christians that are not going to accept the holy shrines to be totally under the hegemony of Israel. In reality, Trump is not declaring war in the Middle East, not declaring war against 1.5 billion Muslims, and in no way, shape, size or form declaring war on hundreds of millions of Christians. In fact, the very notion that Christians will not accept the holy shrines being totally under the hegemony of Israel is absolute nonsense. First, America's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital changes nothing on the ground at all, especially when it comes to the Christian holy sites, which have been under Israeli hegemony for decades. Second, it is under Jewish hegemony that Middle Eastern Christians have access to these holy sites and freedom to practice their faith. The restrictions generally come under Islamic, not Israeli rule. Still, the question must be asked, why the uproar over Jerusalem? Why does the whole world care? Why does the Pope weigh in? Why are Muslim nations in such upheaval? Why are Russia and China concerned? What makes Jerusalem so important? Jerusalem was never the capital of a Palestinian or Arab state. For that matter, There was not even a concept of a Palestinian state until the middle of the 20th century, and no such thing as a Palestinian people until after the Six-Day War in 1967. Every other nation on the planet chooses its capital city, and the other nations recognize that city and put their embassies there. Why won't the rest of the world recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital? Why are the embassies located in Tel Aviv rather than Jerusalem? Jerusalem is the historic capital of the Jewish people. Going back to roughly 1000 BC, Jews face Jerusalem when they pray, and synagogues in the west face east, while every year at Passover, the hopeful prayer is recited, "Next year in Jerusalem." And in terms of functional reality, Jerusalem is the capital of the nation. There's nothing to discuss or debate. That's reality, plain and simple. When it comes to the peace process, more than 2 decades of negotiations have yielded precious little progress, so the idea that recognizing Jerusalem would hurt this process is ludicrous. Instead, if the Palestinians want peace with Israel, they can have wonderful, lasting, prosperous peace, without dividing Jerusalem. But all these are political questions and issues. My question is spiritual in nature. Will God bless President Trump and the United States for making this bold and courageous move? I believe he will, since, 1, in doing so the president is blessing Israel, and God still blesses those who bless his covenant nation, despite that nation's sins. 2, out of all the cities on the earth, the Bible only calls us to pray for the welfare of Jerusalem. See Psalm 122, Isaiah 62 1-8. 3. The tremendous resistance to the president's decision gives evidence to the intensity of the spiritual battle over this city. And 4. There are prophetic scriptures that speak of a Jewish Jerusalem welcoming back the Messiah, and so the decision to fortify the unity of the city is in explicit harmony with those scriptures. See especially Zechariah 12 and 14. And what about God's love for the Muslim world? What about justice for the Palestinians? The answer is simple. If they want to be blessed, they, too, must recognize the Jewish claim to Jerusalem, a city that they do not need to possess or divide. They don't need to call for violence and war. Instead, they need to accept that East Jerusalem will not be the capital of a Palestinian state, that working with the Jewish people rather than against them will be in their best interests too, and that the Jewish people have a massively greater claim to Jerusalem than the Muslims do. As for President Trump, he is convinced that this formal recognition of Jerusalem will aid and abet the peace process. But even if that is not the case, I truly believe that God will bless him and bless America for making this courageous and righteous decision. Let's watch and see in the coming days. HT The Mirror. Dear Patriots, please subscribe to our patriotic channel. Like and share this video so your friends can see it. Thank you. Democrats' Holy Grail shut down after Ben Carson makes a genius HUD change. HUD Secretary Ben Carson is really starting to shake things up. Although he was born into extreme poverty in the mean streets of Detroit, Michigan, Carson was able to defy all the odds and create a better life for himself. He finished school with honors and went on to graduate from Yale University. He became a doctor, best-selling author of medical and political books. He was able to pioneer many advancements in neurosurgery, and he now holds one of the most prominent positions in President Trump's cabinet. Not bad for a man who was taught how to read by his mother, who didn't know how to read herself. The man is a hero in his own time, but of course, liberals just can't help but to viciously attack him at every turn. Because we know the drill. It's only racist if you attack a liberal black person. If they are conservative, it's open season and something to be celebrated. The latest attack was because he bought some high-end furniture for his office to the tune of around $30,000. But is this really a problem since he uncovered $500 billion in bookkeeping errors when he ordered an audit of HUD? Trending, CNN reporter nearly gets into physical fight in White House, gets smacked back to reality by Sarah. More on this via the Daily Wire. Ben Carson was the first neurosurgeon to successfully separate conjoined twins, so, he's kind of a superhero. But apparently, he's also not a bad accountant. President Trump picked Carson to head the Department of Housing and Urban Development, whose budget grew by leaps and bounds under Barack Obama. In one of his first acts as HUD Secretary, Carson ordered an audit of the agency. What he found was staggering: $520 billion in bookkeeping errors. The total amounts of errors corrected in HUD's notes and consolidated financial statements were $516.4 billion and $3.4 billion, respectively, the auditors wrote. But there were plenty of other problems, too. Here is an excerpt from the report. There were several other unresolved audit matters, which restricted our ability to obtain sufficient, appropriate evidence to express an opinion. These unresolved audit matters relate to: 1. The Office of General Counsel's refusal to sign the management representation letter; 2. HUD's improper use of cumulative and first-in, first-out budgetary accounting methods of dispersing community planning and development program funds; 3. The $4.2 billion in non-pooled loan assets from Ginnie Mae's standalone financial statements that we could not audit due to inadequate support; 4. The improper accounting for certain HUD assets and liabilities; and 5. Material differences between HUD's subledger and general ledger accounts. This audit report contains 11 material weaknesses, 7 significant deficiencies, and 5 instances of non-compliance with applicable laws and regulations. The same problems were detailed for each of the last 3 audits, and the auditors say the continued problems were due to an inability to establish a compliant control environment, implement adequate financial accounting systems, retain key financial staff, and identify appropriate accounting principles and policies. So, look for Carson to get out his scalpel and start operating. Or perhaps he'll use a machete. Update: Snopes fact-checked the above claims and labeled them mostly false, citing the fact that Carson did not initiate the most recent audit and that he did not recover $500 billion in funds, which is not claimed above, only that the most recent audit reported that much in bookkeeping errors. Below is an excerpt from Snopes fact-check. The audit was initiated before Ben Carson assumed his position at HUD, and it reckons an aggregate figure of accounting errors and not an actual recovery of $500 billion in funds. The referenced audit was actually initiated by HUD's Office of the Inspector General, OIG, who originally issued an independent auditor's report on November 15, 2016, over 2 months before Dr. Carson was confirmed as the new HUD secretary, along with a disclaimer noting that many discrepancies and information gaps existed within HUD's financial statements and notes. That report was subsequently replaced with a reissued version dated March 1, 2017. So isn't this just classic? The man finds $500 billion stashed away in HUD, but liberals can only see that he bought expensive furniture. But let us not forget the time in 2001 when the Clintons were ordered to return furniture which they stole from the White House which didn't belong to them. More on the White House Clinton theft via Los Angeles Times. President Clinton and his wife started shipping White House furniture to the Clintons' newly purchased home in New York more than a year ago, despite questions at the time by the White House chief usher about whether they were entitled to remove the items. The day before the items were shipped out, Chief Usher Gary Walters said he questioned whether the Clintons should be taking the furnishings because he believed they were government property donated as part of a White House redecoration project in 1993, during Clinton's first year in office. But Walters was told by the White House counsel's office that the items he asked about, which included an iron and glass coffee table, a painted TV armoire, a custom wood gaming table and a wicker table with wood top, were personal gifts received by the Clintons prior to President Clinton assuming office. Personal property brought to the White House by an incoming president does not have to be disclosed on financial reports. As a result of the counsel's determination, the furnishings were sent on to the Clintons' new home in Chappaqua, New York. However, government records show that the gifts that concern Walters did not arrive at the White House until after the Clintons moved in. At least one of these items, a fixed-reed wicker table, was logged in at the White House on February 8, 1993. The widow of the manufacturer, Joy Fix, said last week that it was meant for the White House, not the Clintons. This week, the Clintons returned the 4 items to the White House, along with other furnishings, after questions were raised about whether they actually belonged to the Clintons. All the furnishings had been designated official White House property by the Park Service in 1993. Julia Payne, a spokeswoman for the former president, said the Clintons wanted to be overcautious in light of the concerns that had been raised. Despite the questions posed by Walters, Payne said the Clintons or their interior decorator acquired the 4 items in Little Rock, Arkansas, before they came to Washington. Kaki Hockersmith, the interior decorator, did not return repeated calls this week seeking comment. The Clintons came under strong criticism after disclosing that they were taking with them $190,000 in gifts received over the last 8 years. GOP lawmakers and others criticized Hillary Rodham Clinton in particular for accepting many presents just before she joined the Senate and became covered by strict ethics rules that prohibit accepting gifts worth more than $50. Yes, the Clintons have always been this crooked. Good thing the White House will never have to house them again. HT Patriot Journal.